Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing the 25.11 jungle tier list. So, if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were very few jungle changes this patch. Most notably, we saw a nerf towards Elise, a buff towards Diana, a buff towards Udyr, and a buff towards Rengar. There are some other slight adjustments that I've made to the tier list, but mostly it is relatively similar to the 25.10 one. Hopefully there'll be more changes in 25.12. Right now, though, the game's in a relatively, I don't want to say stale, but like some people would use that term, point. But there isn't a huge amount which is being adjusted into each patch, and that has left some people feeling underwhelmed about the current state of the game, which is definitely something which has led to some kind of frustration with like the general kind of like gameplay going forward. The D tier though is going to lead off with Cho'Gath. He is actually removed from the tier list. He saw a spike in play when he got buffed. He has been removed now because no one really plays jungle Cho'Gath that much anymore, and it was only because of the buffs where he saw some level of play. Sylas is going to be the first champion to lead us off in the D tier. This champion isn't very good in the jungle. It needs too many resources. It has a poor clear. He is susceptible to being invaded, and just predicated on advantages. If you can't get an advantage on this champion, he's just never really worth picking. And even in games where he's good, you're just better off flexing him into like one of the other 3 roles you can play him in. Right now, he sits as a D tier jungle pick. Skarner performs really badly in solo queue. A low economy tank jungle, which has been pretty heavily nerfed because of his competitive strength. It mirrors a lot of the same issues that Maokai and Sejuani have. And right now, he's just not that performing in solo queue. There are better builds which people can opt into. We've seen some Overlord's Bloodmails, we've seen some Sterix variations, which definitely give him a bit more agency and damage within the game, but right now he's a pick I just wouldn't recommend for solo queue. In the case of Nasus, he's a low elo gimmick pick. I wouldn't recommend playing him, but some people enjoy just the stacking fantasy of playing him within the jungle. Gragas and Brand are the other 2 champions which remain within the D tier. In the case of Gragas, he's probably towards the higher end of the D tier now. The buffs towards some of the AP itemization did help him, but he's been pretty neglected as a jungle pick for a while now. Brand, they made an attempt to kind of revive Brand jungle. It's getting close. Like, he's not unplayable anymore, but he's definitely not there yet. He is still under the bar, and the nerf towards Leandry definitely still continues to solidify him as a D tier pick, a champion that I just wouldn't really recommend, and there are many other alternatives which I would take over him. Moving on, so the C tier is going to have 2 additions coming up from the D tier, that is Rengar and Shen. In the case of Shen, he had been buffed a string of times. He got like garnered player base within the jungle. He wasn't that performant, but that came from a lot of people who were just like first timing him or hadn't really put a lot of games into him playing him in the jungle. Now that people are more familiar with jungle Shen, he's doing a bit better. He probably sits as more like a mid to high end C tier pick. I think this champion can definitely have value here. His clear isn't bad. He does lack some level of agency, but can kind of like obtain that through his ultimate, being able to impact team fights and be around the map with his global ultimate, which can be quite a valuable thing. He's definitely doing a bit better now, sits as more like a mid to high end C tier pick. Rengar, I still don't recommend him. He's still an incredibly hard elite skewed pick, and the buffs to him this patch were very, very minor, but they're enough that I think people can give him a go. Like, if you are going to play him and practice him in solo queue, making sure you're executing your combos really, really well, I think this champion can have value, especially as like a good AD assassin. If you're not willing to put the time in or the practice and you just want something which can get you LP pretty quickly, don't play Rengar. This champion is still a pick I wouldn't recommend, even if you are going to put time into him, because I think he just requires so much like time investment. But if you really, really enjoy him and you want to OTP him, I think he's a better option now, so he sits within the C tier. The other picks within the C tier are things from like the last patch, like your Sejuani's, which isn't as elite skewed as like your, well, not elite skewed, not as competitively skewed as your Maokai Skarners, to the extent of being like really heavily nerfed, but it's still around that kind of region. She's been in the game for longer. She's been a jungler more than the other 2 for like a longer period of time, which is why Riot have had time to kind of balance her kit a bit better for solo queue, which is why she's like those a bit more aggressive health ratios on the W to kind of incentivize giving her a bit more gold. Otherwise, she would just be the perfect low economy jungler and dominate competitive for that reason. Morgana sits within the C tier. think she's fine as a counter pick. I don't like the champion that much. I've always kind of expressed my issues with Morgana about how in support, obviously, like two of her abilities feel very negligible. They've tried to alleviate that to an extent. In the jungle, you can make use of more of Morgana's kit, and Leandry enough last match did hurt her to an extent. Like, I think she's not as good as an option, and her clear is not as egregious as it was in, like, 2023 MSI, I think it was, where we had the Morgana Rumble. There was one other AP jungler in amongst that. Udyr meta, I think that might have been. She sits as a solid C2 option. Use her as a counter pick, but I still wouldn't really recommend playing her. Kiana and Nidalee are very, very elite skewed picks. I think if you can perform one of these champions, they can be incredibly good. If you don't put the time into them, they're pretty akin to Rengar. You need to. Like, if you don't, then you'll be punished for it, and you won't get good results on these champions. Zyra sits within the C tier. She's a bit more unique. Her clear speed's incredibly fast, and she has a lot of like free time to kind of harass out laners, which is where the value of this champion comes in. And it differs from like more traditional junglers, where you'll obviously clear a bit slower and you'll kind of utilize that time to maybe get a gank off. She wants to use it more to like harass out like laners, clear objectives, and like it's just a bit more leaning towards that than like the other side of things. So I think if you can clear really well on this champion, she can be valuable, but I don't really recommend her as a pick at the moment. She's a bit under the bar, and Leandry being nerfed did hurt her to an extent. Moving on to the B tier vote. So we lead off with, I was going to say Udyr, but Udyr's going to be a bit higher in the B tier. I mean, I'll talk about him now. So Udyr got buffed this patch. He probably sits right at the top end of the B tier. This was kind of like a compensation buff for the Leandry nerf. Udyr jungle also wasn't performing as well in the previous patch, even, well, I mean, not the previous patch, but the one before that, even without the Leandry nerf. So Riot gave him a pretty sizable buff. It's definitely put him in a better spot, and I think if you're an OTP of the champion, you probably perform really well on this pick. It is pretty OTP driven, but if you are like just enjoy the champion, you want to play like the AD variations, you want to play the AP variations, I think he's a pretty solid pick now. I would honestly say he's pretty close to the bottom of the A tier, but I'm going to leave him in the high end of the B tier until we have more kind of like data and games to kind of evaluate how the buffs have landed. Shyvana sits within the B tier. I don't recommend Shyvana. I don't like this pick that much. I think she has pretty big and clear vulnerabilities. She's very, very gold hungry as well. And I think for a champion like Shyvana at the moment, the game is just not in a great state. She does need an update, and hopefully at some point we'll end up getting that. But right now, not a pick I'd really recommend. But does perform better in lower MMR brackets, which is why she is within the B tier at the moment, because she does function better in this kind of like region for the most part. Tierlist sits within the B tier. She's definitely found a bit more of a footing ever since the major item buffs. She's still incredibly unpopular within the jungle, and is mostly also driven by like people who've played a lot of Tierlist jungle. I still think the pick has value though, and she is like a good flex option in her current state. So if you play mid Tierlist, you want to play her in the jungle, I think she's doing alright for herself. I also think jungle Tierlist is probably a bit easier than mid lane Tierlist, as mid lane Tierlist is very, very like you need to be able to effectively like CS well and like trade well, and jungle Tierlist is about just clearing and then like looking and like ganking lanes and then just exploding a target. That's a lot of what like the responsibilities of jungle Tierlist have. Vice is within the B tier. The nerfs to her were pretty meaningful in the previous patch. She definitely isn't as performant in solo queue anymore, and for that she does sit towards the lower end of the B tier. She's fine though. You can get good results on her if you've put the time into her, as is a lot of the B tier. Gwen benefited from the Nasha and Rabadon cost reduction. She went from being a C tier to a B tier option. She still doesn't perform amazingly within the jungle, but she definitely performs like close to the bar. So I think she's in a relatively balanced state. And if you want to play jungle Gwen, and you find the right angles for it, then yeah, she can be a pretty effective pick. Rek'Sai, primarily just played by like OTPs of the champion. If you enjoy Rek'Sai, then you're probably going to continue playing Rek'Sai no matter the power level. She's in a pretty, I'd say, not great spot of health. I think this champion should probably just be an S tier mainstay to be like a to have some other player base. Otherwise, she's just the least popular jungler in the game, and that's probably a kit issue more than anything. And like people are just don't play monster champions as much, which is like obviously just an issue with the whole kind of like thematic of them. I think Rek'Sai is probably just gonna end up being this like the bottom of the the player kind of based like jungle list, she's just not going to be that popular. Right now, though, I think she's fair as an option. I wouldn't recommend playing her, but if you do, then you're probably fine for the moment. Graves, I know a lot of people hate Graves at the moment. I think he's pretty bad, but I mean, he's not great. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, this champion's probably towards the lower end of the B tier at the moment, but you can get results on him. Give him a lot of gold, and he would do damage. Not quite as much as he has done in the past, though. I think that's the big issue of the champion, but and like some of the lethality items being nerfed for ranged champions also did hurt him. So he sits as a B tier option. Also a pick I just wouldn't really recommend at the moment. But if he gets buffs, you could definitely shoot up as like a solid A, maybe even S tier option. Ramos sits within the B tier. He is being updated next patch, which is good to see because Ramos has been pretty heavily neglected for a while now. The changes are very, very big, and I'll talk about them a bit more in depth in the 25.12 patch rundown. But the main like TLDR is he's going to be better against magic damage, not as good against physical, and they're kind of rejigging some like parts of his kits, so he's not as like so he has more use cases and he can do objectives better. I'm pretty sure that's kind of like what they're going for. So Ramos, be interesting to see where he lands next patch. I wouldn't recommend playing him for this patch for that reason, because he's going to definitely be like very different in the way you want to play him. Sits in the beta at the moment, but yeah, I mean, only would you really use him as a counter pick, and I mean, if you get counter pick spots, he probably like jumps a tier. If you don't, then he's like almost a D tier champion. Just wouldn't really recommend playing Ramos at the moment. Lee Sin sits within the lower end of the B tier. Graves and Lee Sin are like your popular, not so great options at the moment, as opposed to like your Viegos, who are like popular and pretty solid options at the moment. Zed sits within the B tier. The absurdity of his clear speed is the reason why this champion can work within the jungle. If you can't clear well on Zed, I wouldn't play him. I also wouldn't play him if you're not that great at executing his combos and on like snowballing with gold advantages. If you do, he's one of your best options. He is like number 2 best Smurf jungler in my opinion. Like you go Talon and then you go Zed, and like Zed can take over games really easily if you are very comfortable on him. Zac is not performing as well at the moment. He's still fine. Like, he sits in, like, the middle to low end of the B tier. I just wouldn't recommend him over some of the other tank junglers in his current state. He tends to be a bit more mid to high elo skewed for a tank option. And if you can play him well, then, yeah, you can still get results on him. But he's a bit beneath the bar at the moment. Shaco sits within the B tier. Both Shaco forms are fine in the current state. AD Shaco probably a little weaker than AP Shaco, but also played a bit more than AP Shaco. The AP Shaco can be really good in the right spots, but also doesn't have quite as much agency. Is a bit more reliant on people like playing into him than him like taking over the game with like his really, really egregious early game damage. Obviously, the champions snowballs incredibly hard with gold, and if you can get those advantages, then he can be a really good pick. If you don't, then I wouldn't really recommend playing Shaco. He sits in like the mid beta. I'd say he's fine as an option if you want to play him. Mordekaiser, solid low elo champion, pretty unpopular at this point. He can be really solid in the right spots. Like, I think there are compositions where this champion can definitely have value, but he's a bit slow around the map. He doesn't clear as fast as he used to, and for that, it kind of just leaves him as a B tier option, like a low B tier option. I think if you are comfortable playing him though, then yeah, you can definitely get value out of this pick still. Karthus sits within the B tier, one of the best champions to sink a lot of time into. I think in the right spots, Karthus jungle is a very, very strong pick. If you're not comfortable clearing on him and then like maximizing damage output, then he definitely does lose a decent amount of value. But if you are, then yeah, his pick can still be really good, and he definitely performs incredibly well on Elite still. So don't sleep on Karthus. I leave him in the B tier because I think just for average play, he's just not as performant as other options. So yeah, he sits within the B tier for that. Teemo sits within the B tier as well. He's like a mid to low end B tier option. I think if you want to play Teemo jungle, he's fine. If you don't, he's not mandatory by any means, and he definitely performs a lot better in mid to low MMR brackets. Darius had like one patch of being the best and most popular jungler in the game, and then they nerfed him pretty hard, and then they nerfed him again for like his top lane power, and now he just sits as a fine jungler. He's like around Mordekaiser area. Like, if you enjoy Darius, then he can be good. I think Jax is a bit different. I think Jax actually sits sort of behind of the B tier. I think Jax in the right spots is actually one of the better junglers you can go to at the moment. His counter strike can be really valuable. Jax as a champion is a bit on the rise at the moment, especially with like lots of auto attackers in the meta, like his Inzals, for example. Jax is great into them. Yeah, he's definitely a bit towards the high end of the B tier at the moment. Olaf, I think, is a pretty slept on jungler ever since they like buffed him, like just for his own power and buffed him for jungle. I think this pick has been a legitimate option, and some people have caught on. He's actually seen some competitive play. He's not quite there as like an S tier option, but I think he can compete with some of the A tier picks, especially if picked against the right composition. I think Olaf is incredibly composition dependent, but in the right comps, he can be like one of the best options to just straight up go to. Kindred, Belveth, I think if you're very good at playing the invade, poach away camps playstyle, these two options are probably pretty mainstay picks within your pool. If you're not, I would just avoid them. They're pretty linear in the way they want to play the game. Just being able to like this poach, invade, and then just play really aggressively. And if you're not comfortable with that playstyle, then you'll definitely struggle on these two champions. Hecarim is doing a bit better. I mean, he sits at the high end of the B tier. I don't think he's quite an A tier option. I mean, obviously you can easily argue that he should be an A tier option, and a lot of the like high end or the low end of the tiers can easily be merged into the tier above them. Hecarim, yeah, I mean, he sits as a high B tier option. I think if you're comfortable playing him, he can be pretty good at the moment. I think if you're not as comfortable, then he's not like quite in the overpowered state which he has been in like seasons prior. Right now I'd say he's a pretty balanced champion, if anything. Fiddlesticks sits within the B tier. The changes to him last patch ended up being a net nerf towards jungle Fiddlesticks. I think if people I think if you're like very comfortable with a champion, then he can be really valuable in certain compositions, and his ultimate is one of the strongest within the game. But you need to get the clear down. You need to effectively utilize his like kit, and his kit is different to like most of the champions. He's a pretty unique pick in the way he wants to play, and that can definitely be dissuading for like if you want to pick up a champion. Moving on to the A tier then, we lead off with Lilia. I think Lilia in the right compositions is a great AP option. I really do recommend learning Lilia, just having her within your pool. She is a very valuable option to lean into. Amumu hasn't been as performant as of recent. He sits as like a mid to low end A tier option. He's still great for mid to low MMR brackets as like a tank with a bit more agency, good CC tools, good damage. I think that can be rewarding, but he's just not quite there for like high to elite, if anything. This champion is definitely like a good emerald below option, but struggles once you get like diamond higher. Ivan sits within the A tier at the moment. I think this pick actually is a high A tier option close to. Ivan for a while wasn't as performant, but people have started opting into like different variations. He got buffed not too long ago, and he's definitely found his footing again, and yeah, is very deserving of an A tier spot, even a high A tier spot. Kane sits within the A tier. He got nerfed in the previous patch. He's one of the more popular junglers in the game, and Riot's whole logic there was he had some win rate to lose, and they didn't want one of the most picked junglers in the game to be either like one of the higher win rate champions, which I mean it's like fine logic, I guess, but I don't know, like Kane is still fine. Like he's a solid A tier option. Pick the right form in the right game and you'll probably have value. That's just like the way this champion goes. Blue is more elite skewed, red is obviously more lower and more skewed. Eve has found her footing again. I think this champion is legitimately not a bad option anymore. The mage item buffs actually gave her life as like a solid A tier option. I think if you play Eve or you want to play Eve, she's in a pretty solid spot at the moment. Trundle. This champion's an interesting one. It went from basically not being played in competitive to being like considered one of the S tier junglers in competitive. It's really interesting to see how quickly this jungler went from, wait a minute, we can like play this pick again, and in the right spots I think he can be really good. Obviously, one of the big reasons why he's kind of like come back into the meta is Xin Zhao. Like he's a good answer to Xin Zhao. He's a relatively good answer to Sejuani, and yeah, that's kind of why he started popping up a bit more. For solo queue, he's fine. I don't like Trundle jungle that much, but there is definitely value in this pick. He's very easy to play as well, and that can reward him as being like a solid A tier option. Poppy actually sits towards the high end of the A tier. I think she's one of the best counter-pick junglers in the game. I think people have also started catching on to Poppy as well in competitive. Poppy jungle definitely looks to be as like a very good option in her current state. Wukong sits within the A tier. I think if you can still play Wukong, he's above the bar. He's a good option. Good into physical damage compositions, being able to utilize the passive. His Cyclone is a very powerful ability. And yeah, if you give him items, he'll print a lot of damage. I think Wukong, pretty solid A tier option. Briar sits within the A tier. This one's always going to be one of those, like, wait, Briar in the A tier, but it's mid to low elo skewed, and this is kind of where Briar really thrives as a champion. I think in high elo, Briar really does just fall off as a pick. Like she's almost all the way down to like the C tier in like Master Plus. But yeah, as like a mid to low elo option, this is kind of where she thrives as a pick, and she's pretty deserving of like an A tier spot in her current state. Talon sits within the A tier. He is like the number one Smurf jungler. I swear every time I play like on a Smurf, this champion is just like the jungler which is just slammed by either side or just banned for the most part. Talon jungle performs really well at the moment. He is like considerably more popular in mid lane Talon, and whether the Riot want to do something about that in the future, be interesting to see. But right now, yeah, he's a pretty solid jungler and very, very good for like smurfing, like taking over the game. He's loads of mobility, loads of damage, and if he can execute his combos effectively, he's a very good pick. Pantheon has really been on the rise as a jungler. He sits towards the high end of the A tier with like your poppies. I think he's competes comfortably with the S tier options as well. Like his play is pretty good. He's seeing competitive play, like if you want to like watch how Pantheon plays, and yeah, there's a lot of competitive games out there to kind of watch now at this point. Pairs nicely with like your Tilias or like just your AP options for solo queue for the most part, and yeah, I'd say he's a pretty good A tier option in his current state. Mundo's pick rate has like quadrupled ever since like the Alois incident. It's really funny to see the graph for this champion. Obviously, it's mostly for top lane, but even jungle Mundo has seen a play rate increase, and I'd recommend playing Mundo at the moment. I think he's in a very good spot. Even for jungle, I prefer him. Even I think top lane, he's a lot of relatively hard matchups, but he scales really well, which is like one of the big like merits in top lane. In jungle, you don't get punished as hard. You're gonna scale more freely, and I think this is a very good role for him in his current state. Neferi still performing relatively well. Definitely sits as like a solid A tier option. Not quite the premier like S A tier pick she was in like the previous patches, because she has been nerfed obviously, but yeah, still a very, very good A tier option. Kha'Zix has been like kind of decent for a while, not quite like the premier A tier picks, but like this champion ever since he got buffed on his passive is like a pretty solid A tier assassin. He's good, not the peak of the jungle tier list at the moment, but yeah, he's like a good AD assassin option. Master Yi has been decent ever since he received his buffs like a while ago, and yeah, he's kind of just like been riding as a pretty solid A tier option. Performs relatively well in low, mid, and even elite MMR brackets in his current state. Like he's a good all-round jungler. Like if you give him gold, he will print damage as well. So yeah, definitely a pretty solid option to add to your pool if you enjoy him. Volibear sits within the A tier. I think Volibear's a really slept on jungler in his current state, especially for competitive. I'm honestly surprised this champion doesn't see more competitive play. Great tower diving potential, great early game dueling, skirmishing. Doesn't need as much gold as some of the other junglers, but does still want gold. Like he can do a lot of damage if you give him gold. And yeah, I'd say he's a pretty solid A tier option in his current state. Viego and Yorick wrap up the remaining A tier options. I think Viego still sits towards the high end of the A tier. One takedown can be all you need to make this champion work. He can snowball fights. He's like the most popular jungler, I believe, at this point. He's the new Lee Sin at this point. And yeah, Viego sits as a very solid A tier option. Yorick has lost a lot of his popularity within the jungle, but Yorick as a champion is just in a very good spot at the moment. Works. I mean, Yorick jungle tends to be traditionally a bit more mid to low MMR skewed. I think in Elite, you're looking more towards like B, even C tier as a Yorick jungle. But right now, yeah, he's still a very good A tier option. Moving out of the S tier then is Nunu, who hasn't been as performant for a while now. I had him in the S tier like for a couple of patches ever since he did that like buff to true damage on camps, I believe it was, or like the pet damage to camps, and he really benefited from that. But he's kind of like fallen back down as like a fine A tier option. I think if you play Nunu, he's still good. I think if you don't play Nunu, you're probably I wouldn't recommend him as much at the moment, but he still sits as like a solid low end A tier option. In the case of Elise, she got hit pretty heavily this patch. She probably sits more like around the area of the Eve now. Still a really good elite pick, and if you give her a lot of gold, she'll still print a lot of damage, but she's not going to clear as fast anymore. She's also going to miss out on kill opportunities, as the nerf is meaningful for that. Jungle support Elise rather didn't get hit anywhere near as hard, so if you do enjoy playing Elise and you want to play her probably in a stronger role now, then I'd recommend playing her in support. The S tier event. So moving up from the A tier to the S tier is Diana. Actually, I'd have her as a high A tier option. I need to look a bit more at like the builds to kind of really decide whether this champion actually warrants a spot in the S tier. She's definitely better by this patch, and I would watch her, like play her, even like make sure that you're like if you're comfortable with a champion, that you can get good, like you can get LP out of this pick now. If you're not comfortable with a champion, then you're probably not needing to play as much as some of the recommended S tier options, but she's definitely at the high end of the A tier, and I would recommend at least trying her if you haven't already. Moving on to the S tier, then we lead off with Xin Zhao and Jarvan. These are like your jack of all trades, stock standard junglers. I think Jarvan is Jarvan and Xin Zhao are really good, just like introductory junglers, and even just mainstay junglers. Just having them within your pool is basically mandatory at this point. I think in most spots you can get value out of these picks, but like your Jarvans want to play into your your comps with like less mobility, and your Xin Zhaos want to play with like your enchanters traditionally because he can get a lot of value out of them. Warwick is probably the number one mid to low elo pick. He doesn't scale as well into higher MMR brackets, which is why he's not usually talked about as much. But for mid to low elo, he's one of the best picks in the game, and I will recommend him as that because I do think this pick is very good within the bracket of play, which his tier list is recommended for. Echo is still, is probably the jungler which has benefited the most from the AP buffs, which wasn't Elise. Obviously, Elise has been nerfed now. Echo, riding high at the moment, sits within the S tier, a great option. And then Nocturne. I have Nocturne as my number one jungler. I think even though Warwick is like the best for mid to low elo, I think Nocturne is just the best all-rounder. He has so many, I see he has so many tools. He has the tool to kind of like really dictate the game with his ultimate. It's a very powerful ability. His clear is good. His isolated dueling is good. His team fighting can be decent. Does fall off compared to other junglers, but as long as you're utilizing the power of like the fast ultimates early, I think this champion is one of the best options to go to in the game. Those are my thoughts. I'd recommend the S tier. A lot of the A tier is really good options though, and definitely like if you're looking for more elite SKU picks, some of them can definitely shine in those brackets. And yeah, I'd say but jungle Tierlist is in a pretty good spot at the moment. I would like to see some pretty heavy shifts, so I think the game is definitely in one of the more considered stale spots, and that can be a bit of a frustration point. So those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.